everyone. My name is Tori and I'm the Executive Director of the Enid Symphony Orchestra. Welcome to Community Talk today. Today I'd like to welcome Artistic Director of the Enid Symphony, Douglas Newell. Doug, welcome to the show today.
Thank you. You say that every time we come on the air. This is marvelous. I love being welcomed.
Yes, it's nice to have you. So today we're going to be talking about our upcoming Latin Night concert on Saturday, August 21st at 7:30 p.m. featuring virtuoso guitarist Matthew Demon for Rodrigo's Concierto de Aranjuez. We'll talk a little bit about our annual premiere fund just in a bit. So first, I'd like to start off with thanking our sponsors for our upcoming concert. I'd like to thank Park Avenue Thrift. We love them here in town, and they've actually just celebrated $4 million given back to the community.
Yes.
So we'd like to give them a shout out. The Oklahoma Arts Council, with assistance from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Burt Clampett Memorial Fund. So Doug, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about what we can expect at this Latin Night concert here in a few weeks.
Well, this is going to be one of the most fun concerts. Two pieces of music only. The first is by a 19-year-old composer, Viennese. His name's Franz Schubert. Now, he lived about 100 or so years ago. But Franz Schubert was a young man who studied music. He finished his training in his college education, and his father expected him to become a school teacher, and he became a school teacher. Well, he liked to hang out in the local taverns at night, and while there, he would write music on napkins. And he wrote like 600 and some songs. He's very famous for his songs, but he's also, by the time he was 19, he was writing his fifth of 9 great symphonies. So we're going to play, as a tribute to youth, we're going to play the Fifth Symphony by Franz Schubert. Now, as I said, he wrote it when he was 19 years old, and it's very much in the style of composers who were just a generation before his generation, Mozart and Haydn. He also knew Beethoven. And held him in great esteem. But this particular work sounds a little more like the other two composers, Mozart and Haydn. It's about a 30-minute symphony. It's very lively, has one of the most beautiful slow movements I think you'll hear in all of the classical symphonic repertoire. And it's music for Schubert just flowed so freely, you know. In his creation. So we're going to have just a phenomenal time opening the program with the Fifth Symphony of Franz Schubert. And then the featured piece for the night, Joaquin Rodrigo, the Concierto de Aranjuez, the guitar concerto. And this really is, if you're a guitarist, you need to hear this concert. This explores everything the classical guitar can do, and yet it features Latin themes, Latin rhythms. It has, the first movement is very dance-like. The last movement is also very dance-like in its nature, but the slow movement is one of the most beautiful melodies I think ever written. Now you have to know that Rodrigo suffered from diphtheria when he was a child, and he was blind from the age of 3 onward. And he was married, had a marvelous wife who was a concert pianist, actually, and she helped him in his composition. He actually composed in Braille. And this.
How does one compose in Braille? Like,
you know, I've never seen it.
The notes elevated, or
I've never seen it. I've never seen a Braille score at that, but you know, it's just sort of like the Braille alphabet, it's the Braille musical alphabet.
That makes sense.
So very much the same, I suppose. But anyhow, he wrote this piece of music in 1939, and it was such a joyful piece of music. Now the second movement of it is a little, well, it's I don't want to say austere, it's one of the most reflective and introspective melodies and pieces of music you'll ever hear. His wife, later in their lives, and maybe even after he passed, his wife said that, you know, he wrote this when she miscarried their first child. And he's very introspective, a bit depressed, but he writes this incredibly haunting melody for the English horn in the orchestra, which has its own unique voice, a little covered sound. And it's a sort of a tenor instrument, but it has the most beautiful sonority. And to put a symphony orchestra with a classical guitar, and we're not talking electric guitar, you know, there'd be a little amplification for the guitar in the hall, because in bigger halls it takes that. But it was so masterfully written as a dialogue between the guitar soloist and the members of the orchestra. It's a smaller orchestra, as is the orchestra for the Schubert. I think, you know, normally we play with maybe 53, 56 musicians on stage, something of that nature. Here, I think the most we'll have is 34, and that's for the Rodrigo, and then we pare that down to about 31 or so for the Schubert Symphony. So it's a program of very light texture. It is not a very long concert. Be preceded at 6:30. We open the cash bar in the hall. We hope you'll come, bring your friends. Just celebrate being together. Enjoy the performance. It's about an hour without an intermission, and it'll be short of an hour. And then we have a reception prepared for everybody in the Eleanor Hornbaker Banquet Hall immediately following the performance. So you come, this is family fare. It can be date night. It can be an anniversary night. What have you. It can be a great celebration night. But come early, stay late. That's what we love at the Enid Symphony Center. It's the most elegant facility in Enid.
We're not biased at all, of course. Maybe a little bit.
I am.
There you go. So I kind of want to go back to the...
Well, really?
Kind of want to go back to the guitar concerto. So, you know, when we, you know, feature guest artists with the symphony and they perform concerti with the orchestra, you'll see a lot of piano and violin and cello. And last year we had saxophone, Jonathan Nickel. But guitar, can you describe a little bit like how a guitar concerto works? Like, is he going to be amplified? It's not an electric guitar, certainly. You know. It's an acoustic guitar.
An acoustic guitar.
How is that going to work?
There'll be a little bit of just a touch of amplification on him. You know, just enough to sweeten the sound in the hall, but it's not going to be anything blaring that you're going to have to wear earplugs by any sense of the imagination. Actually, in a concerto, in say a piano concerto or something for a wind instrument or a solo violin, there's a great dialogue that goes on. The orchestra will play the theme, the soloist will play the theme, or vice versa, and they'll sort of pass it off back and forth. It's the very same thing in a guitar concerto. The difference is that the textures are lighter and fewer instruments used, fewer instruments play when the guitar is playing. And so there's a little more use of the solo guitar answered by the orchestra, but they certainly all play together at times in the climaxes of the music. And you know, it is very much like accompanying a singer or any other soloist, and it's such a precise or percussive, an immediate sound that comes from the guitar, and especially with an artist the caliber of Matthew Denman, who is on the faculty at Oklahoma City University. You know, it's a great treat. It's a challenge, let me tell you, especially in the slow movement. There's so much flexibility in the music and in the notation of what's written for the guitar. It's very crowded on the page, and one has to listen very carefully to catch things. But I mean, I've seen him perform, and the way he phrases the music, he hands it off to the orchestra very naturally. It'll be one of those things. I don't want to say easy, because it's never just easy, but it's something more comfortable with the greater the artist that you work with. And it also, I mean, a great artist like this elevates the orchestra. There's an old saying. I was taking tennis lessons one time. Someone said, well, you play tennis with Jimmy Connors, you play a better game than you do with your brother. Sorry, John. But I don't know if John plays tennis or not. We did play polo on bikes one time, but that didn't go well either. Anyhow.
Can't imagine.
You can't imagine. I'll tell you about it sometime. Anyhow. But yeah, when you perform with truly skilled performers, you tend to elevate one another to a higher level of what you can accomplish. So it was the most difficult part about this concert was deciding what to pair with the Rodrigo Guitar Concerto.
I was going to ask, because we touched upon instrumentation, so what that means, how many players we have, what instruments we have, and they do have fairly similar instrumentation, even like fewer players for the Schubert, which is an official symphony, so to speak. And so, and we're still going with a Latin Night theme, because, Rodrigo is a quintessential Spanish composer. And so what was the process like, Schubert and Rodrigo, and I'm sure even classically trained musicians also agree, it's such an unusual pairing, but it somehow works. So can you tell us a little bit about what that process was like, coming to that pairing of Schubert and Rodrigo?
Sure. Very few people realize that when you program for a concert with a symphony orchestra, you program quite often in mind with what the soloist is playing and the size of the orchestra it takes to accompany the soloist. And that's for economic reasons. If you're doing a smaller work, you don't want to pair it with a gigantic work that's going to cost you twice as much money to perform. Now, I know this is mundane for people who are not in the business, and it's something that the average audience member doesn't think about. That's why we have a Premier Fund. We'll talk about it in a little bit. But what you do when you're programming and you're going to feature something at the end of the evening that's going to be very delicate in texture, you don't want to start the evening out with something that is mammoth in sound and heavy for the orchestra to play. You want them to end the evening with that sense of lightness and buoyancy in their playing, whether wind or brass or strings. You want them to end with that lightness of technique that it takes to accompany the Rodrigo. So you look for pieces of music that have a similar character and a similar scoring. I first started out, I was going to do a very, the Rodrigo is after post-World War I and pre-World War II, but, and that was at a time when classical composers, symphonic composers will say, were writing music for smaller resources. A lot of the music, the fact is, a lot of the musicians had been lost in the First World War in Europe. And so Stravinsky comes along and writes this, he's been writing these mammoth ballets, The Rite of Spring, The Firebird, Petrushka. Well, he comes along and writes this little fairy tale ballet about Pulcinella. And it has one of each woodwind and one of each brass and a small group of strings to play. So that seemed to be the very piece to perform with the Rodrigo. However, it takes an inordinate amount of rehearsal time to make it work. So once again, we're looking at the economic side of presenting a concert. So that was the first program. I discarded that and went to the second program, which was sort of classical favorites. And I had about 8 pieces I was going to put in front of the Rodrigo, and then I decided
8 pieces.
They don't, well, they're short.
Yeah, that's true.
I was looking for about 30 minutes worth of music to play before we play the 22-minute Rodrigo concerto.
Yeah.
So I had these little pieces, little opera overtures, the theme from Masterpiece Theater, things of this nature. But the more I looked at it, and I stuck with that program about 2 days, and the more I looked at it and molded over in my head what it would sound like, the more I decided, no, this is too distracting. This goes in too many directions, because the focus still needs to come down to the end of the evening of the Rodrigo. So my next thought was, I don't want to do all these things I've conducted many times before. I want to do something new. I want to learn new things. I mean, I'm just a kid. I need to know new things that I haven't done before. And so it turns out that about 18 years ago, I bought a set of parts to the Schubert Fifth Symphony, but for some reason we didn't perform it. I don't know why. And we had a conversation in the office, and we were really struggling with a deadline as to coming up with a program. And sometimes when I said to you, I think that I didn't want to do those 8 pieces before the Rodrigo.
Yeah.
I said, well, less is more. And I left, and on the way home, less is more. Yes, the Schubert. It's a small orchestration. It's the right length of time. It stays with one composer. It doesn't. The audience mind isn't going erratic from this to this to this to this to this. It's something that flows through, and it's quick. It's easy on the ear.
Yeah.
And it's very light texture, especially for the strings to play. And it's perfect for what you want the orchestra doing, performing, before they take on the challenge of playing the Rodrigo.
Yeah.
So that's the thought process. It's never, oh, I'll just do this great piece. Oh, I'll just do that great piece. No, it's, well, you can wear your audience out, you can wear your orchestra out, you can spend your year's budget in one night programming that way. But you just have to be careful with, with the resources at hand, both human resources, the musicians, the guest artist, the audience, and the finances.
Yes, yeah. It really, calls into question how much goes into programming a concert. At the Enid Symphony, and all major orchestras around the world, we don't just throw random pieces on a concert. There's so much that you have to consider. I don't think people realize, when they want to hear, big Beethoven 9, for instance, there's a lot of planning that has to go into that versus something a little bit smaller, but still equally musically significant, Schubert's 5. You have to consider the cost of the musicians, the rental parts, if you need to hire additional people, what sort of instrumentation demands that you have. And also, you brought up a good point. You don't want to overload the audience with a very heavy program. So a lot of very intense pieces, a lot of pieces in general, to finish with the Rodrigo, because Rodrigo, it's not an easy piece.
No.
No, it's very technically demanding, both for the performer or for the guest artist and also for the orchestra. So there's a rhyme and a reason to what we do here.
Big rhyme and reason.
Yes.
And it takes, you look at the season, what you're going to do next year and year after next and all of that, and you have all these things in your mind that you would like to do, and frankly, we have, fortunately, more music than we have time.
Yes.
which is, we just try to do as much of it
Right.
as we can. And someone asked the other day, said, what's the one piece you've conducted more times than any other? And I think at this point now, it's Handel's Messiah, which we'll play in November, Thanksgiving weekend. We're about to start chorus rehearsals for that this weekend, as a matter of fact. But then, on one hand, there's I may have done 16 or 18 performances of the Nutcracker Ballet over the years. I've done the Beethoven Ninth Symphony twice. I've done the Fifth Symphony 3 times. Just about everything else I've done once or twice.
Yeah.
And most of what I've done has been conducted one time at this point. But I don't have the luxury of being one of those touring conductors who has one program this year, or maybe 2 programs, and takes it from orchestra to orchestra to orchestra. And this is great for the conductor, and great for the orchestra, I guess. But anyhow, it's so important that you look at the overall picture, and like you say, the emotional challenge to the audience in this particular concert is not great. It's very enjoyable music. You go to a Mahler Resurrection Symphony, and this is 90 minutes. You don't want anything else on the program. It's enough.
Yeah.
It's enough. You don't need to over-program. But I want to say one thing, and that is that I always listen to the suggestions of people just walk up and say, hey, have you ever thought of playing this? Or why don't you do this? Or why don't you do that? Or could we do, whether musicians in the orchestra, audience member, people that don't even come, sometimes they say, well, if you'd play this, I'd be there. And I listen to all that, and I keep a running list in my mind, and actually I keep little Word documents of things that
write it down
here and there of what I'd like to do and all that. And it's the mind goes to, okay, how does this piece fit on what I'm doing for the year? How does it fit on a particular program? How can I make it work? But that's half that's a lot of the fun of doing what I'm fortunate enough to be able to do for a living.
Yeah. There's just so much that you have to consider, like when you're putting on programs like this, when you're putting on concerts like this, and thinking of sort of a theme and how that relates to our season's theme, and this year marks the 25th year that we've been in the Joan Allen Symphony Hall. We're calling it our Silver Season. Our final concert of the year is called a Silver Celebration, and that's truly significant. So finding pieces that we want to put on the concert, having to be economical about rehearsal time you mentioned as well, but then also how does this fit into this bigger theme? So we touched a little bit earlier on the finances of the symphony, lots of costs. Can you tell us a little bit about our Premier Fund Drive that we do every year?
Well, the Premier Fund Drive is our annual solicitation of donations for support for the symphony for that particular year. We have income from program advertising, from renting our halls out for private events, public events, what have you, from ticket sales, which ticket sales for any arts organization, if you can make 22% of your annual operating budget, you're doing quite well. It used to be as high as 27% at one time, I understand, but that's the way that is. We also have our cash bar. There's a little bit of income from that. But we have to have concert sponsorships, and then we go to the community at large to ask to help keep something as precious as the Enid Symphony Orchestra in our community. The mundane things take care of themselves in life. The truly precious things have to be cared for.
Yeah.
And we think the Symphony Orchestra is one of the true gems of our community.
Yeah.
The Premier Fund merely is a solicitation of contributions. Our goal this year is to match $99,000 in grants and a private contribution that has been made with the proviso that we can match that money this year. So we're on our way. We're about approaching being a third there.
Yeah.
The process will go on throughout the season. So we'll provide information to that, both on our website. We have information at the concerts for our audience members. And we've already contacted all of our subscribers, and we have an unusually high percentage of subscribers who also contribute to the Premier Fund each season. So that is our main thrust. We also have our annual soiree that the board of directors puts on to raise money, particularly for the children's concert programming that we do
in March,
in the state, and then for the silver season celebration at the end of the year.
March is going to be a very big month for us education-wise. We've got our Carnegie Hall link-up concerts. We've got our Young Artist Concerto competition. We have our concert side-by-side with the Enid Youth Symphony. So that's going to be a very, very big month for that. And we're talking about matching donations. And so what that means is whatever people kindly contribute to the symphony will be matched and will be doubled. So if you give $100 to the symphony, essentially you're giving $200 because it's being matched. And every little bit counts. I mean, even a $50 donation, that's $100. That goes very, very far with us. So it's definitely it's a huge help, and it's a great way of supporting the symphony here in this community. And I think you bring up a really good point about it being a true gem of our community. We just had our Flipside concerts a few weeks ago back in September, the Patty Page story. And it was amazing how many people came from outside of Enid. Some people, and we were speaking with some people at the reception afterwards, they had never even been to Enid. They were looking for things to do. They saw our advertisement on Facebook, and they looked up a bunch of things to do in Enid, and they came and they made a weekend out of it. How many people came from Oklahoma City, from Edmond, from outside of the state?
Denton, Texas.
Yeah, we had people come from Denton, Texas, which I'm still learning the geography. I understand that's several hours away.
Boomer.
I'm getting there. I will say, well, we're kind of in OSU territory, I understand, so them's fighting words. But it's crazy, like, how much did they spend here in Enid? Like, they went out to dinner, they stayed at a hotel, like, how much tourism we're bringing to Enid just by putting on these concerts, so we truly are a gem here in Enid that we want more people to know about. We can't survive unless we have the support of our community. So I think lots of really great things happening at the symphony, and lots of great ways to support us. So
what's next with the symphony?
Well, after this concert, we have our production of Handel's Messiah coming up in November, and so we're very excited for that. We're actually bringing in the Enid Symphonic Choir. We're getting that group back together. We're also incorporating the student choir of Northwestern Oklahoma State University out in Alva, and we're actually featuring the voice professor, Dr. Karsten Longhurst, as a tenor. So we're very, very excited to do that, have a community effort to celebrate the holiday season.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah, lots and lots of great things coming up at the symphony. So, well, I believe that's all that we have time for today, Doug. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And sort of as a wrap up, our Latin Night concert featuring guitarist Matthew Denman, Saturday, October 21st at 7:30 p.m. You can purchase tickets online at enidsymphony.org. You can give us a call at 580-237-9646. And you can visit our office. We're open Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., 5th floor of the Knox building. Also follow us on Facebook at Enid Symphony Orchestra. And we thank you so much for joining us and for continuing to support the arts in your community.